Welcome everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about, oh, looks like we're live on Facebook. I jumped the gun there. Today we're going to be talking about the 7 reasons why we don't change, even when we know that we should. So this is going to be a good topic for us to go through tonight. If this is your first time joining me, my name is Tina. I'm a happiness coach and I help business owners be able to deal with the emotional roller coaster of running a business. And I do this by sharing a trauma informed approach, both from my own personal experience, and I also combine this with change management strategies that I learned while I was in 30 years of corporate transportation and logistics. So, sometimes I will bounce back and forth between personal examples and sometimes professional examples. These are all designed to be able to give you something that you can take away, something tangible that you can start to apply to your life today. So, number one reason, and we're going to go through these fairly quick because it's a little bit late for me and I was delaying this. So I am listening to my own stuff of what I need to do here. So, guys, number one, the reason that we don't change is we're in denial that there's a problem. Let's see if, there we go. So we're in denial that there's a problem. And there we go. Speaking of problems, there we go. All right, so we're in denial of that there's a problem and we can't fix what we are unaware of, what we don't believe is a challenge for us. It's not a very good use of time to spend our time trying to fix something that we don't even feel is a real problem. So, number one reason that we don't change, even though we know we should, is maybe on some level internally we don't think it's a problem. In fact, a lot of times we get a greater benefit out of staying the way we are rather than changing. Because the whole reason we have this situation in place and why it's been ongoing is because we get some sort of benefit out of it. And so when we are unable to change, even though we know we should, we know, uh, you know, look at all the stuff that people set at New Year's. We're going to save more money. We're going to work out more. We're going to eat healthy. We're going to do all of these things. And then we don't change. One, we haven't identified that it's a big enough problem for us to bother changing, or we've identified the wrong problem. So, yes, procrastination, but procrastination is actually a surface level thing. It's not digging deep enough. That's just a lazy man's label, basically. It is, you're not doing the inner work to find out why, because when we, as human beings, understand why we were or were not doing something that we know that we need to do, it's because we're getting some sort of benefit. There's some sort of emotional reason, and that is not logical. But once we dig down and we understand where this is coming from and why we are operating in this way, then this is when we make those changes, and we will be able to do something that is actually beneficial for us. So, number one is defining the problem and defining what the real problem is, right? So when you say you're scared of failure, what is it about the failure that you're afraid of, right? So what do you feel is going to happen if you fail? Because we fail at things all the time, right? So this really requires us to dig down and do more inner work and start asking ourselves certain questions out of what is the actual problem? Why is it important to actually change that? And why would we want to stay the same? Okay? Asking ourselves why we would want to stay the same, what benefit we get out of it. So that is number one, is identifying the problem and making sure that it's the real problem. If we're in denial of it, we have no option to change it. Number two, maybe we've identified, yes, this is a problem. And yes, we know we need to change it, but maybe it's just not high enough on the priority list. Maybe there's other problems that we're also aware of that we have to focus our attention on those problems first, or there's an order of operations. It's like, I must do this thing first and then I can do these other things. So it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of an example that is universal. I guess, let's take an example. You've all heard the expression, putting the cart before the horse. And obviously that's not a good strategy. It's much better if the horse is pulling the cart. But what if you don't actually have a horse? So the horse needs to go first, but you only have the cart. So now what do? So you have to figure out, okay, it's a problem that I don't have the horse, but I need to go find that. So you need to go solve other things before you can get to solving this other problem of the cart is not moving, right? So if you're trying to solve that problem and you're like, okay, the cart's not moving, and the reason is because we don't have a horse. So now we got to go fix that, and then we can come back, and then we can put the horse before the cart, kind of thing, right? I know, kind of lame example, forgive me. It's a bit late. So priority, if it's not a big enough priority for us, if it's not causing us enough pain, we often will not change it. It's only when it becomes a big enough problem and we understand why it's important, then it gets enough of our attention, then it's worth us taking a look at what is going on and really focusing our energy. And this happens all the time in business. There's lots of things that there's no shortage of problems, that's for sure. Now the problem is prioritizing. Well, what is it that we need to do first that is gonna give us the biggest return on our investment of time, resources, money, any of that kind of stuff? Yeah, sometimes you take one step forward and 2 steps back, and then you take 1 step forward again and you take 5 steps back, and it's this cha-cha shuffle kind of thing that ends up happening. And that is kind of normal. Know that sometimes when we're not able to move forward on some of those things, there can be some good benefits as to why we're not. And sometimes we get slowed down by certain things, and it's a matter of taking that step back and taking a look at going, okay, what is going on here? And is this actually, why are we making this problem the priority that we need to fix? Maybe there's some other things, and if we, sometimes we try to charge ahead. I see this all the time in meetings or any change management process. What'll happen is you'll identify the problem and say, okay, we just need to put this solution in place, but not really digging down deep enough to understand the root cause of the problem. So what ends up happening is you implement a change, you implement a fix or a solution, and then what ends up happening is it only deals with the surface level. It doesn't deal with the root cause. And I've done many things in business along these lines, and usually when they call me and I'm figuring out the root cause of the problem, because I was one of the few people that actually had the patience to dig down and really understand what was going on. And so sometimes people will blame things on a system problem. Oh, the system's not working, it's not doing this, it's not doing that. And then when I'd get in there, I'd be like, okay, it's not that the system isn't working, it is a training issue that people were unaware that the system was supposed to do certain things, but they needed to do certain steps ahead of time in order to get it to do that. So they just assume that the system is not working. So everybody's trying to focus on that rather than realizing that there were a few people that weren't trained properly. We got them up and trained, we documented the SOP, filled in a few missing pieces, and then we got everybody on the right track. And look, oh, the system works when you know how to work it. Funny that. So understanding the priority is important with being able to make whatever changes. Example, say you're living in a place and you're like, I need to move to a cheaper place. I'm struggling to be able to afford the rent or the mortgage or whatever, and I want to be able to move. But I don't have enough for first and last month rent at another place, or maybe I have challenges with my credit, or I'm in between jobs right now. One of those kind of things. Say any of those kind of things. So yes, you need to solve the problem of living in a cheaper place. Well, there's a couple of different things that you can do. One, you can make more money. That's usually an easier way to solve things. Two, you could, okay, how much more money would you need to make to be able to stay where you're at? Or is it still something that you actually need to leave? And you're like, okay, well, I still need to leave, but now I don't have enough to build up what I need for first and last month's rent at a new place. So now what do I do, right? So now there's other problems and other things that bump the moving problem down on the priority list because you have to solve these other things first. So I hope that gives like a more universal example that people can kind of understand and that you can kind of apply, going, maybe some of the reasons why you're not changing is because there's other problems that you need to solve first, get them out of the way in preparation for you to solve that bigger problem so that you can move forward. Okay. Number 3. Sometimes the reason we're not changing is we lack the know-how. We don't know how to change. We don't know what it is we need to change. We're not sure what the solution is. So we've identified the problem. We know it's a priority, but we don't know how to fix it. And then usually what the biggest solution for this step is, it's not what, it's usually who. Who knows how to fix this problem? Who knows how to solve this? And it's a matter of seeking the guidance, seeking the understanding, seeking the knowledge that we need in order to find out how we can solve this problem, right? Sorry, I'm just adjusting Facebook here. Okay. So, number 3. So when we lack the know-how, that's going to delay us being able to change. So we're aware of it, we know we should, but we don't know what it is that we need to do or how we need to do it, right? Having a mentor, having a guide, and sometimes you can even be frustrated. You might be like, but I know how to do this, but I just can't get my head wrapped around it. And sometimes having another person's perspective, having a coach or a mentor guide you along the way, because they're not emotionally attached. They don't have the same filters that you do, so they're going to see things in a slightly different way and be able to give you a little bit more of an objective perspective on what is happening here or how you can probably do that. I don't know how many times I'd be like, and I've done this even when I go walking in a store, right? It's like I tend to be resistant to ask for help, and then sometimes I get into a store and then I'm like, okay, stop wasting time, Tina, just go ahead and ask somebody. And usually 9 times out of 10, by the time I finally break down and ask somebody, I'll say, yeah, can you show me where the coffee cups are? And they'll be like, yeah, it's like right there. If it was a bear, it would have bit you, right? So it's one of those kind of things, right? So sometimes we can't see the solution is so close to us, but sometimes that's because we're focused on maybe the wrong priority, and somebody else can see more clearly, all we have to do is just fix this first and the other things are going to fall into place. And you're like, oh, well, damn. I should have known that, right? So it can be something like that. So lacking the know-how is number 3. Okay, number 4 is, doesn't matter which side, so I'm either messing up Facebook or I'm messing up TikTok, one of the two, of standing in the way of the board. Okay, so lacking resources or tools. If we know that we need to make 100 calls in a day, right? And you're like, but I don't have a phone. It's going to make it a little bit more challenging. You need to find different avenues. It's not that you don't know what to do or how to do it, and you know it's a priority, you know what the problem is and how to solve it, but you're lacking the tool that you need to be able to solve it. So focusing, and again, this changes the priority of the problems, and what problem do I need to solve first, and then what problem do I need to solve second. And sometimes we don't know all of the steps, and that can prevent us from moving forward with it as well. It's like, well, I don't know what tools or resources I'm going to need in order to solve this. I think I'm going to need these things, but sometimes fear of the unknown of what it is that you need to fix the problem can prevent us from making those changes. The better way to do this is at least take a step forward, take some action forward, and if you have to come back and retrace your steps a little bit, then it's better to do that, so at least you have some sort of forward movement, forward progression on the situation. Okay? And taking smaller steps. Okay. This one. Sorry, got some cat hair going on here. Okay, so number 5 is you understand the problem, you know what the fixes are, you know what the solution is, but if you implement this solution, it's now going to cause problems for other people that might be around you. So this could be, hey, if I go and maybe it's something that's going on at work and you're like, okay, if I go and I explain what the problem is and I put this solution in place, then it means that we're going to end up having to let some people go, right? Or it might mean, and maybe you delay doing that because you're like, okay, I know we need to make this change, but these are really good workers. What else could I do to maybe keep them? Yeah, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. So a lot of times it can be something like that, right? Maybe it's a relationship that you know that you need to end because you're not happy in it, but you don't want to take that step forward because it might hurt somebody else, so maybe you feel it's easier to take that on yourself and just hope that it gets better. Or maybe you talk yourself out of it saying, well, it's not that bad. Or maybe you have to set some boundaries with some family members or something like that, and you're like, I know that's what I need to do, but it's too hard because it is going to be a change for those around me. They're not going to like the change. They're going to get upset about the change. So it's a matter of understanding who's going to be impacted by you fixing the problem. And when you put that fix in place, what is the fallout going to be? When we understand that kind of thing, of course, that can shift our priorities around a little bit, and we may need to put other things in place first in order to facilitate the change that we know that we need to ultimately make. So, and this has happened many times in business when we've gone to do system implementations, right? So there's always things that you have to put in place. You know what the system is, you know how it works, you know what the priority is, you have the tools, you have the resources, but you know that when we implement this, there's going to be a whole lot of training that both internally, our employees are going to need, our customers are going to need new training, our vendors, our suppliers. They're not going to be happy about this because now, although it makes it easier on our end, now the carrier or the customer is going to have to do these extra steps that they never had to do before. So for them, it's now a problem. And now they're not going to be happy about that situation. So there's certain things that you have to put in place to help facilitate that change and get buy-in so that the change, it goes smoothly and it runs where everybody is happier with the solution, right? Yeah, you can't please everybody, but you also, there's certain things that you can do being aware that the change is going to be not well received. There's been many times that I've had to be responsible for implementing changes that were not going to be well received, and this is where communication comes in huge. And it is really important to be able to communicate this in a proper way that gains buy-in, that shows the resistant person as to why this actually would be a benefit. Now, at the end of the day, sometimes there's no way to sugarcoat it, and it is going to be what it is, but allowing maybe some different trade-offs too. So yes, I know this pill that I'm going to make you take over here is going to be a little bit bitter. It's not going to be fun for you, but here's what I can do on this end for you to help ease that transition, right? I can do this or I can do that. There's many different ways that you have to start brushing up negotiating skills and finding other alternative ways to be able to solve a problem that maybe is a bigger problem for them, and then they are much more receptive to taking on that additional problem that you might be giving them by implementing your solution. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the fix, it fixes it for you, your company, you know, your personal situation, but it may cause problems for other people. And this happens a lot, especially for setting boundaries too in our personal lives. People might have been used to you being a people pleaser and just doing everything for them and always being available. And then when you set the boundary, not because you're trying to punish them, but because you're trying to take care of yourself and do things better for yourself, they can often become impacted by that because they were used to you being there. And so sometimes change, even though it's a good thing and it is a positive thing, it may have consequences or create challenges for those around you that would cause some resistance and may also cause you to try to divert back. Okay, so this brings us to the next thing, which is number 6, is when you go to implement the change. Yeah, is that a little bit better? Okay, what do you do about long-term employees that say it's always worked well in the past? Yeah, so that brings us back to number 1. They don't see it as a problem, right? So they see the solution as the problem, right? So what you're trying to implement, they're seeing it as a problem. And this is where change management stuff comes in, is if you don't get buy-in from the people that are actually going to be using the system or doing the change, then they're going to find ways to circumvent it. They're going to find ways around it. I've seen this so many times in businesses where we've gone and implemented a new system because we wanted to be able to better capture data, understand the analytics a lot better because everything's going to be in one system. And lo and behold, you'll have a few cowboys out there that are going to be working around the system and they prefer their old way of doing it, and they have all their data on a spreadsheet. And you're like, no, we need you to use the system. So what ends up happening is you have to understand first, seek to understand. So when you're trying to communicate, yes, you could try to run roughshod over somebody and just force the implementation, but it's much better and will save you time in the long run if you can gain buy-in. And this requires a lot more heavy lifting on the front end to be able to talk about why they should make that change. They have to understand what's in it for them. Why are they doing this? Why is this a benefit for them? Sometimes they may be resistant to it because they fear that, hey, if I do this, I'm actually working myself out of a job. And it's like maybe you have some team members that are willing to embrace AI because they're like, well, if I figure out how to work this AI thing and do this in the business, I'm taking myself out of a job, right? Now, they would be much more open to that kind of possibility if they can see, hey, when we get this off of your plate, this is what we have lined up for you, and this is what we need you to focus on, so that, but we need you to get this off of your plate first. And so when you kind of reframe it, rephrase it, show them what's in it for them, show them that there's a benefit, because nobody wants to start putting in extra work and doing extra stuff if they don't see how this is actually going to solve a problem, or if they see that it's going to cause a greater problem. And we can't automatically assume that the employee, just because they're an employee, that they're wrong. Maybe they're resistant to change. We have to actually listen to them, because they might be calling out a red flag that is really important and could be detrimental to the business. How do I know this? Because there's been many times that I've called out issues that were problems. I got shot down for them, and it was funny because even 5 years after I left the company, that thing that I called out that was going to be a major problem and was going to add headcount to our team, even though the customer was implementing a new system, we ended up having to carry that additional body count on our team because of a customer system change. And it was a very manual process, and we still had to go forward with it. So even though I called out, hey, here's what the warning signs are, if we do this and we don't have these things in place, this is going to be the fallout, this is what we're going to end up having to do. We're going to end up having to hire another person because this is going to add this many hours and this much bandwidth to the team, and we don't have those resources right now. So being able to really understand that and break that down, understand the cost and benefit analysis of it, and at the time, we could not stop a major enterprise system implementation. So we had to go forward with it. Now, I'm sure they worked out some sort of additional compensation to allow for the additional body count that ended up being within the team. So there's other ways around it, but it's a matter of, you can call out the problem, you can say, okay, yes, I understand implementing this system is going to fix things for you, but in this case, our customer caused a problem for us. So that's number 5, right? It fixes it for them, but it caused a problem for us, and it was a problem that lasted even after the client left, right? Okay, so number 6 is unprocessed emotions begin to surface, so we end up stopping reinforcing the reason for the change, okay? So what that means, so if you, I'm going to give a personal example on this one. So my grandmother and my grandfather, okay? My grandfather was an alcoholic. He drank a lot, and he would go on these binges to prove that he was not an alcoholic, and he would do this by quitting drinking. Or regulating when he drank, right? So he would do certain things like he would wait until he wouldn't have a drink before noon, right? So he would be, but he'd be pacing the floor waiting for the clock to strike noon so that he could have that drink, right? Now, my grandmother was all on board. She wanted this change. She wanted him to stop drinking. He was a problem when he drank, and it was constant fights, right? And he was the lesser of all the traumas and stuff like that from that. But so he'd go on these white knuckle binges where he wouldn't be drinking. And it ended up causing more problems, to the point where my grandmother would actually fix him a drink and just say, here, drink this, because you're too big of an asshole without the alcohol. You're an asshole with it, but you're even worse without it. So she would end up fixing him a drink so that he would calm down, right? And guys, come on. Women, certain time of month, she's trying to lose weight, but she's being bitchy, so you give her chocolate anyway, just to calm her down, right? And I won't disagree with that. Sometimes chocolate is the only rational solution. So, yeah, exactly, right? So it's like, what is the bigger problem, and understanding that kind of stuff. But being able to deal with the emotions, understand where are these emotions coming from, what's going on here, is this short term, do you know what the beginning, middle, and end is, do you know what the path, the roadmap is, to be able to move through that and understand where the emotions are coming from. Do you have the tools, do you have the strategies to be able to deal with the emotions that come up? And this happens a lot in business too, when you go to make changes, and if you try to make those changes too fast, it's going to bring up a lot of fear, right? A lot of uncertainty. So if you don't properly address a change and communicate these changes in a way that is beneficial to everybody, so that they understand what's in it for them, why they need to put in the extra work to facilitate the change, then you're going to end up causing a whole bunch of emotions come up. And people are going to be resistant, they're going to be angry, they're going to be fighting, they're going to be pissed off, they're going to stick it to you on something else because you caused problems for them, right? So some people like to get their lick back, right? Whatever it is. So these are all things that can end up ultimately sabotaging the change and stop you from reinforcing whatever change that you implement if you don't understand the change management process, if you don't understand how to communicate this, how to gain buy-in, how to support the people through the change. Because it's not just like, okay, well, you said that you were going to do it, so why aren't you doing it? Well, the communication has to be ongoing, and you have to really understand what is going on and continue that communication. And this takes a lot of additional work, and most business owners are just way too busy to be able to manage that kind of change, manage the emotions of the team, of the customers, of the vendors, whatever, of the IT, right, of the project managers, all of this stuff. There's a lot of different things, and yes, you can just focus on black and white. No, you said you were going to have it done by this time, and I don't care what the reason is, you should have just done it, right? You're behind, and now there's consequences. Well, you can't fire everybody, otherwise you don't have a business, and it's already hard enough to find good people. So let's keep those relationships intact and be able to learn how to deal with those emotions so that you can implement changes and that you can reinforce them as well. Because if you can't reinforce that change, then you will default back to the old behaviors, okay? And sometimes that's not always a bad thing. So if you have a circumstance where it has gone, where people are not following through, right? And they take a few steps back and they don't continue with the change. So what ends up happening is they default back, right? And sometimes you have to take a few steps back to clear that next hurdle. And so what ends up happening is when you, does reinforcement mean rewards? That is a really good question. It depends. So it depends on what the situation is and how certain people are motivated. Some people are more motivated by tangible rewards. They see what benefit they're going to get. Hey, when this project is over, you're going to get a bonus, right? Or when this project is over, we're going to have a big party, or we're going to, they're going to get some sort of reward. That can work. it also can backfire. So it's more of reinforcement is reinforcing and communicating the why. So a lot of times, what'll happen is in the beginning of the project, everybody's gung ho, hey, this is why we're doing it, blah, 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 and everybody understands why. But as time goes on, especially if you're doing longer projects with bigger systems that you're implementing, people will forget that original reason and they get so stuck in the weeds that they need reminding, just like us. Oftentimes it's not that we don't know what to do, we need reminding of what it is that we need to do and why that's important and why we started out on this journey in the first place, right? We can forget those reasons, and sometimes it's just a matter of acknowledging that yes, this is a challenge, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I promise you it's not going to be a train again. It's not going to come to run us over again. That we are going to get through this. And of course, this happens in organizations too. There's a big difference with the very first time that you try to implement the change. When you implement the change and everybody's all gung-ho, but if you've had a lot of repeated failures, then there's a completely different process that needs to happen. You need a lot more touch points. You need a lot more confidence, reassurance, communication, not just outward, but receiving the communication, where you have to listen a whole lot more to what challenges they're experiencing. Why is this difficult? And asking them what they see as possible solutions for it, so that it's not just a top-down driving the solutions, that it's a we're all in it together kind of mentality. So more of a big picture when we get caught in the details. Yeah, it can be really easy to get stuck in the weeds, or siloing. It's like, well, I'm focusing on my piece and I don't care what's going on over there on the other team, or what kind of problems they're doing. I'm making sure I'm hitting the deadline and I don't care if you guys are. So sometimes you end up getting this whole every man for himself kind of mentality happening. And so communication, reinforcing that the teamwork that's required, why the change is necessary. And we do this with ourselves as well, right? When we hit those challenges, when it gets hard, and expecting it to just flow easy is part of the problem. So when we know that it gets hard, what are the strategies that we have in place? What are the systems that we have? What are the communication structures we have in order to deal with some of the challenges that come up? And I know there's been all kinds of change management stuff that I've done. Like for instance, when we implemented ISO 9000 in one of the companies that I was in, you have the non-conformity reports, right? So you implement SOPs, but then you also have to have non-conformity reports of NCRs and filling those out so that we can start to identify. It's like, okay, well, if you only have one or two, then it's not a big deal. But if you have a whole stack, it's like, oh, there's a problem here that we need to look at. What do we need to do to fix and tighten up this SOP so that it flows smoothly? It happens the same way every time. And we would have to go in and seek to understand first, asking questions, really trying to get to the root of where is the problem. It's like, well, I didn't do this piece because Bob over there didn't give me the report that I needed to be able to do it. So then you go talk with Bob and find out why Bob didn't give him the report. And then you figure out, oh, it was because I can't get that information until this time, but this person over here wants it at this time. So you go back to the other person and you find out, it's like, well, why do you need it at that time? And then you find out, oh, well, I just wanted it at that time. There's no reason. Well, can you have it at this time? Because he can meet the criteria of getting this to you on time, but we have to change the expectation of what time that report comes over to you. Oh, okay, sure, great. Now we solve the problem. But if you just fight back and forth and go, I need it at this time, and you don't seek to understand why, and you don't seek to understand why they haven't been able to meet that timeline, then you can cause a lot of emotional challenges within the business, within the team, that people start butting heads on this, and power struggles and power dynamic stuff comes out. And you want to avoid that as much as possible, and knowing that when you go to implement change, there's a much higher likelihood of the emotions to get escalated, because when there's change, that introduces an element of uncertainty, of some doubt, and that is fear. And fear is false evidence appearing real. So like I've got up in the corner over there, everything is either a cry for or an expression of love. So when we know that our teams are going to end up in fear, anxiety, yes, anxiety is another form of fear. When we know the team or the people around us are going to have anxiety about the change, that is all the more reason that we need additional communication, we need additional support, we need additional touch points of reassurance to help them through that change, so they're not so afraid, and that they have the confidence that they will be supported. A lot of times it's not so much the change, it's the fear of lack of support, that they're just going to be left in the unknown, and and if they have any undealt with abandonment wounds, then that's really going to trigger the hell out of them, right? Of the time that, you know, their parents said that they were going out and they didn't come back. You know, there could be all kinds of things that could be happening on, and these kind of changes can end up triggering all of these unresolved wounds within our team as well. So being trauma informed, trauma aware, as well as change management aware, is really important to be able to resolve these potential conflicts before they even get to a point of conflict. That you understand how to manage these, how to navigate them, how to mitigate these challenges. Okay? And then number 7. All right, let's see. Can we see this? There we go. Okay. The benefits we get by staying the same. Let's face it, we all have bad habits that we know that we should probably change. We know we should drink more water. We know we should, you know, get more sunlight, we should work less, we should have more fun, we should do all these different things, but we get all stressed out and we force ourselves to go down certain paths. And yeah, sounds contradictory, right? we know that there's changes that we need to make. But if we have dysfunctional things in place, at some level, they are actually serving us. And really getting, this is a little bit of a mind bend, but it is really important. And it kind of ties in a little bit with this. Maybe this is a little bit easier. Number 5, of if fixing the problem might fix it for you, but it might cause problems for the people around you. That could be one of the benefits. It's like, well, I don't want to cause a fight with my spouse by fixing this problem or addressing this problem, right? So you let it go, you let it slide, you don't say anything about it, and you get the benefit of not having to argue, not having to upset somebody. So that's what I mean by you are getting some sort of benefit by not fixing this. One of the things, so let's say, for example, losing weight, right? You know, it's beneficial for your health to lose weight and to be in a healthy weight range, but there is some sort of benefit that people who are overweight get. Maybe it is managing their emotions. Maybe they find that when they don't have that food to cope with, they have much more anxiety and they don't want to have medication, but they find that if they eat a cheeseburger, they're calmer, right? Or whatever it is. Or it distracts them from their problems, that distracts them from bigger problems. So maybe it's the lesser of two evils, right? It's no different than when my grandmother would fix my grandfather a drink when he'd try to quit drinking because he was crankier. He was, you know, not as fun to be around. So she would just give him the drink so that she didn't have to deal with the problem of him being cranky and irritable and not knowing how to manage his emotions because he's trying to white knuckle this process. And so for her, even though she wanted to solve the problem of him drinking too much, she ended up giving him the drink, right? So that he would not be so cranky. And yeah, the first 2 weeks of a diet. So yes, you can white knuckle your way through that, and you can get through that. But usually it's not so much, especially if this is not your first time dieting, right? And people who are obese, I can speak for, because I've been everywhere up and down the scale, and I've been up as high as 400. I'm about 225 right now, so still working my way down. But I have to deal with the emotions that come up around that. Thank you so much, Biggerfoot. So I have to deal with some of the emotions, and sometimes the delay happens because of not looking at the emotions, and there's some sort of benefit. Well, one of the benefits that I get is that I don't have to change my wardrobe stays the same. Maybe I don't have to deal with the additional attention. So having to deal with the emotions around that kind of stuff, I wasn't prepared, getting additional attention. And it's like, oh, I haven't had to deal with this for years, and I don't know what to do. So how do I deal with this, right? So you take a couple of steps back. So sometimes taking those couple of steps back, understanding, okay, wait a minute, solving this problem now introduce these other problems that weren't actually present. And this happens a lot of times in system implementations, right? It's like, this is really good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that feedback. That's really, really helpful. So implementing a system, there's been times where we've gone and we've implemented the system. We're like, this is good, this is what we needed to do. But then there will be something completely random that we weren't anticipating, that we didn't factor in the initial plan. We forgot about a whole department, and we're like, oh shit. They're now no longer going to have visibility to something that's critical for their role. And now what do we do, right? So now we have to take a couple of steps back, and we have to find, because there were other problems that weren't there before that change was made, and now we have all of these other lists of problems that we have to implement solutions for. And so then this can kind of bring us back to the priority level again, right? Of, well, now we may have to pause this, fix these things, get that structure foundation in place so that we can then continue moving forward with the change. And there's been many times that was needed. There was times where we were doing mergers and acquisition. We were merging two systems from a company that we bought. We were very similar on the systems, and it should have been perfect. It should have been great. They should have been able to talk to each other, except there were different, we had same item codes with their item codes were the same because we bought from the same vendors. However, there were different pack sizes, and there were different co-pack sizes. And so, like, we'd have a 20 pack and they'd have a 12 pack. And so, and they had the same item number. So what we ended up having to do was a whole item cleanse on both sides of the companies, and going back through and clearing and cleaning the data before we can actually merge the systems and join them together, right? And then there were also additional challenges on financial sides of when it came back out. How do we differentiate too? Because on the financial side, they were still running separate, but we were on the SAP system that we were putting together. It's all going to be into one, but we still had to report financials separately. So there can be a bunch of different problems that come up by trying to solve one thing. It's like you fix one thing, break 20 others. That is a typical system kind of thing, right? So you may have different structures, different systems that end up being put in place that you have to implement these processes. and address these challenges. And this is why that communication, that reinforcement, that understanding whatever frustrations are coming out, right, of the process, and having that high emotional intelligence to be able to deal with those kind of stuff. Because the problem is, especially if you're implementing this in business, your team has got their regular day-to-day job, and then you're dumping all this additional change on top of them. And so that becomes extremely stressful. That can be traumatic if they are not given the proper support. So you don't want to cause workplace PTSD. Although you can form some really strong trauma bonds, it's probably not recommended. So yeah, I still have trauma bonds with some of the people that I've worked with when we've gone through really hard times and we managed to survive. I find it hard. I find it when we make changes, the hardest thing is when we hit the first set of problems or hurdles. Okay. Yeah, so what about the first set of problems or hurdles is it that you find the hardest? Is it people are wanting to give up then, or they don't know how to solve the problem, or you don't have that structure in place, or you weren't anticipating additional problems coming up and you're kind of side blinded? How do we not sabotage the whole change? Yeah, that is a really good question. Because there's been times that as I've talked with some people, so this particular project, there was not one that I was on, but it was a different company that was rolling out SAP, and an SAP implementation is a pretty big change. And this company went forward with the change, ignoring some of the warning signs, and then they ended up having to roll back the change, and it took them another 2 years before they were able to try again to implement that system. So there can be problems if you go forward with a change. So when you say not sabotage the whole change, that's where I would recommend bringing back in the whole change management process of identifying the problem. Where is it on the priority? Do we know how to solve the problem? What are the resources and tools we need to solve these additional problems that came up? And then reprioritizing, how do we do that, and creating a new project management list of being able to go, okay, these are the other things that we also need to implement. It may push back timelines, it may and in some cases it may stall the change altogether, right? Or you may have to look for new solutions, and that's pulling everybody's input in of like, okay, what is the fallout if we move forward on this? Are there alternatives? So I've been on teams where, like that one where our customer was implementing SAP, and it caused problems about what it is. We're getting towards the end of the situation, but we are talking about 7 reasons why we don't change even though we know we should. Okay, so going through those changes, what ended up happening is we had to come up with an alternative solution. We couldn't stop the change from being implemented. We knew we were going to have additional problems that were going to cause a whole host of headaches. And so we knew that we were going to have to hire a new body to handle just the data entry portion of us not being able to run this through the system now, and we were going to have to create reports in this new way. So we had to, on our side, put those additional plans in place that were not part of the original change. They were part of the problems that came up as we were starting to implement the change. We also knew that we couldn't stop the change from going forward, so we had to implement some temporary band-aid solutions in order to solve that for the interim. And then we had to work towards how are we supposed to move forward with this, right? And then you do some cost-benefit analysis of understanding, okay, well, you know what, this one body compared to implementing a multi-million-dollar system, you know, it's a data entry clerk, so go to the temp agency and bring somebody in, right? So refocus on the original reason for the change, yeah, which might alter the solution path, exactly. And breaking down what those challenges are and putting solutions in place for those additional challenges that came up and adding those to part of the project plan, which may change the original timing if that's possible. It may delay it, it may not blow it out of the water completely, and you have to know with the boundaries of what you've set for the project of, is this something that we can put on hold? What's the framework? What are the pieces that we cannot change? Maybe we can't change the date and this has to go forward no matter what. So if it goes forward no matter what and there's the fallout of these things, then we need something in place to be able to deal with those things. Maybe it's manual processes outside of it. What are we going to need? What are the resources? What are the tools? What are the processes? Who's going to work on that? How are we going to deal with that, right? And it's like, okay, well, John's the only one that knows how to do this, but he's at max capacity. Okay, so what other things can we take off of John so that he can have the bandwidth to be able to deal with that? And then you give that to certain other people. It's like, okay, well, what's the process of that? So sometimes you might break one thing and then have 20 other things that you have now to do to support that change. But if you are understanding the original reason for that change and it is still worth it, is still beneficial to you, then you will find other ways or alternative solutions for these additional problems that came up and implement those as well and include those in the project plan. So, and that allows for everyone to be happier and be able to deal with the emotions that come along with that, and being able to seek to understand and get that constant feedback. Your team's going to be so much happier with you as well, because they're going to see that you're listening to them, you're addressing those additional challenges, and you're asking for their feedback, you're asking for their input as to how, and this is part of change management facilitation, is being able to facilitate the emotional changes that are necessary to implement the system or structure or culture changes to be able to deal with this, right? So yeah, I could go on and on for this kind of stuff, but I think I'm going to wrap this up now, considering it is 4:30 a.m. for me, and I really shouldn't have started so late, but I really appreciate the interaction and the questions. This was amazing. I really love this. TikTok made me think, great presentation, well done. Great. Well, I'm glad you like it. If there's anything that you wanted to go back on, please go to my YouTube channel, Coach Tina B 125, click on subscribe, and you'll get notified when I upload this replay to my YouTube channel, and that you can go through that and you can be able to take notes, remember what it was that I was talking about. And I'm sorry that the screen is probably all wacky for the board, but the notes were more for me and you got to hear me talk. So guys, I hope that was helpful, and this was much more of a business one that I ended up doing, but it was fun and I enjoyed it and I'm happy with it. So guys, thanks a lot, have a great night, and come back again tomorrow. Bye.